Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss Keir Starmer's announcement that tuition fees will remain under Labour due to the economic situation, in contrast to his preferred policy of scrapping them in 2020. Now, I'll explain both the practical and the political dimension to this announcement, as well as why, as a former teacher, I think that although the logic for the announcement is fine, I still think it's the wrong policy. But I also thought the original policy was wrong as well. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, I don't know when this video is coming out. It may have come out on Tuesday, the day of the announcement. That's when I'm recording it. Maybe later. Who knows? The news is going to be mad this week. But there was no way I was not going to talk about this. There's no way Labour are announcing an education policy and me as a former teacher not going to talk about it. So this is a mixture of politics and policy, which are not always closely related. The politics of the situation is that in 2020, Keir Starmer expressed his intention to scrap all tuition fees. He has now said that the economic circumstances mean that this won't be the best policy to pursue, but that most of his 2020 policies will remain intact. Now, in terms of people who will disagree with this announcement, myself included, not necessarily for the same reasons, we'd be in one of two camps, possibly both in some cases. The first camp are those who criticise a change of policy purely for the sake of it being a change of policy. I don't think these are serious people. I've said for a long time, a party can have policies. In fact, indeed, it needs to have policies, but they're not set in stone until the manifesto is published. Now, whatever you promise in the manifesto, you absolutely deliver to the best of your ability, because that is your covenant with the voting public, and you have no right to expect to remain in power if you break it without a stunningly good reason. I know the Tories do it habitually. They shouldn't be able to get away with it. It is, of course, possible that you promise something, then an unforeseen catastrophe hits the country and you are unable to deliver it in the time frame intended. People may understand that. But unless that's the case, if you promise it, deliver it. Now, people will then quite reasonably say, well, weren't the promises to the membership part of a covenant as well? Yes, absolutely. But apart from the fact that the economic situation has changed in unforeseen ways in the last few years, the general voting public are not that bothered who runs the country. Whether it be Labour or the Conservatives, as long as it's the one who is best at that particular time, as far as they're concerned. The same is not true of the Labour membership. We believe that a Labour government is always the better option. For example, is there any policy which a Labour member insists is adopted if it means losing the election? If they know it will mean losing the election? Or what if it means you could still win the election, but implementing it will lose you the following election? Is there anyone in Labour who says, yes, we should still adopt the policy even if it means a Tory government? If so, are they really in Labour? The general voting public are more important. I keep saying this, and I've said it in several Labour meetings in my life. They're more important. We as Labour members are Labour members because we support a Labour government. We're not doing it out of selfish self-interest, or we shouldn't be doing. But there is a second reason for still being able to disagree with this policy, and that is thinking it's the wrong policy. This is a more reasonable criticism, so we need to consider the pros and cons of the original and the new policy, and why I think both are wrong. So first of all, why has Starmer changed policy? This is not out of the blue, by the way. This has been a discussion raging inside Labour for months now, and it's been reported months ago. The argument which won essentially went like this. As far as I can tell anyway, I'm not involved in all of the secret meetings. So when Labour sets out its first budget in government, education will get a particular share. And Labour governments are not known to skimp on that. If tuition fees are abolished, that reduces the overall budget for education, because that's part of its income. Now, as long as the remaining budget is sufficient, it's still a viable policy. But when Labour come to office, they will not only find the economy in dire straits, limiting budgets across all departments, but they will find education in dire need of revitalisation. Wages for teachers across the sector have fallen badly behind since Labour last in government. You may have noticed some strikes going on. And it's not just existing staff who will need paying properly. We need to replace the staff who were lost because of underfunding in the sector. That's not just teachers, but support staff as well. What those who have argued for this change of policy have argued is that imagine you were in charge of education, with all the investment needed. You're looking around at all the investment needed. Are you really going to prioritise cutting tuition fees over, say, paying good quality teachers to remain in the profession or not go on strike, or paying for proper levels of support staff and teaching staff again to reduce class sizes and to make sure that the kids who need the most help get it? Because government budgets are always a trade-off. If you fund one thing, that means reducing funding for something else. It always means, so whenever you say we should fund this thing, you always have to say, so what do we pull money from to pay for it? What they are arguing falls by the wayside in order to pay for universal tuition. That's what they're saying. What do you get rid of? Now, before I give my own thoughts, let's look at the counter argument. And that is that tuition fees are a barrier to many people from poorer backgrounds going to university. Now, this is a combination of a couple of major factors, as far as I've been able to tell from talking to students as a teacher. First is that even with student loans, actually managing to live away from home on the very tight student budget is not easy. When I moved away, I wasn't good at budgeting. Could argue I'm still not, but I wasn't good at budgeting then. But when I got into trouble, I had my parents to help me out. They were on decent money, right? So what if you've got someone, your parents cannot help you? You are on your own. You're an 18-year-old. You're moving away from home. You're completely on your own. It's a very tight budget. Student budget, student accommodation is not cheap, and the money you get is not very much. And if you get into trouble, you're stuck. You're on your own. What can you do? Nothing. You've got no one to go to. From a poor background, none of your relatives will be able to help. You're stuck. That's worrying for people. That concerns people. Some may be able to get work to fit around their studies, but what I've got from a lot of students that I've known is they are concerned with what happens if they get into financial difficulties, because you're asking them to budget and stick to a tight budget, and they don't even know what things cost, really. Very daunting prospect. The second is just the idea of debt. Even if they think they might, it's just like debt is a completely different concept to someone from a very poor background as compared to a middle class background. A student loan, if you end up getting a decent job out of your studies, it's actually no big deal. It's just a graduate tax more than literal debt. It doesn't work like a literal loan. But for someone from a working class background who has been brought up, and their parents were brought up, to consider all forms of debt to be a trap for life, because for working class people, any form of debt is often a trap, it's really off-putting. The policy, therefore, can be seen as one of essential social mobility, removing those barriers from people from a working class background who may be very able, very bright, and could be the scientists, the doctors, and so on of the future. Now, my own personal view is that both of the arguments are logical and both of them are wrong. The policy of scrapping all tuition fees is wrong, and the policy of not scrapping them is equally wrong. The purpose of government funding is to encourage something to happen that you want to happen, which would ordinarily not happen. If a kid from a middle class background wants to go to university and their parents support that decision, they will go to university with or without tuition fees. I went to university at a time when tuition fees did not exist. In fact, I even got a grant. So I got not only my fees paid, but a grant for living costs, right? My sister, who's a little bit younger than me, was in the first wave of tuition fees. She still went to university because our parents said, well, you're still going to university, we will just pay it. So for myself, there's no argument for having the state pay the tuition fee and living costs of people who will go anyway, who will happily take out the loans, go to university, understand that they're only going to pay it out when they earn above a certain amount anyway, and they'll just see it as a graduate tax, but in the long run, they'll make out of it, right? The issue is the students who will not go to university with tuition fees in place, out of fear of being landed with tens of thousands of pounds worth of debt. Those from sort of what you've generally called in education low aspiration backgrounds, who won't necessarily see it as an investment or are concerned about other things. truth be told, because we have way more graduates than graduate jobs, for a lot of university students, actually, it isn't really an investment anyway, is it? Let's be honest. So my solution would be to be more selective with the funding. I would fund tuition fees for certain types of student, and I would fund living costs for another group with quite a lot of crossover, I would think. So I think there should be a proper review. I don't think you just go away with my idea, but my starting point, and I've thought this for almost as long as tuition fees have come into effect. I think within a couple of years of tuition fees coming into being, I had come to this view and I haven't really changed it. So what I would do, if a student doesn't have graduate parents and their combined income is below a certain amount, I think the state should cover their tuition fees. That way, selective scrapping of tuition fees doesn't eat up a large part of the education budget, because most of them will still go to university, but you get your social mobility. You get the kids who are at the moment are not going to university. They will then go, or some of them will go. Second, if a student whose parents earn below a certain threshold and that student is studying for something for which we are short of graduates, our engineering, nursing, medicine and so on. So we identify certain courses as being in demand for the country, for the good of the country. The state also provides a living cost bursary. Now that could mean means tested, sliding scale if necessary. But what that means is you then get your more able kids from the poorer backgrounds. You dangle a carrot to get them to do the sort of things, the skills we need, learn the skills we need in our society. It also means someone from a poor background without graduate parents studying for a profession we're desperately in need of could go to university, not pay a penny. But there's another aspect to my scheme. So it's not a benefit to the UK government or to us as a society, for example, to train a nurse who promptly buggers off to Australia to ply their trade. We've paid for their training, we don't get the benefit. So I would add something else in. Rather than just cancelling the fees and paying the living costs as I've described, I would set them up as a loan, similar to the student loan system. But this particular arrangement would be different. And the arrangement would be that nobody pays anything back for 10 years, don't matter what you earn. For each year after graduation and that you are resident of the UK, 10% of the amount is knocked off. So while you are a resident in the UK, no interest accrues for 10 years. And 10% gets knocked off each year. At the end of that 10 years, if you've stayed in the country, it's all wiped out, it's gone. So that kid who wants to be a doctor and is capable of becoming a doctor, they can train for free as long as they're, in the UK for at least 10 years, presumably practicing medicine. What else are they going to do after graduation? A decision that will be entirely theirs. It won't be down to chance. It's their decision to stay in the country. They won't pay a bean for it. And it doesn't mean using public funds to pay for people who could afford to go themselves. Now, I will finish off by saying, I am aware there is a political problem with my preferred solution. It is a policy which benefits society as a whole, but more specifically, it benefits people from poorer backgrounds. Doesn't do anything for the middle classes. Now, not only is such a policy not a vote winner, there are lots of policies like that, but it could actually upset some of those crucial middle class voters, because we know, they may think to us, well, hang on a minute, we're going to be paying taxes to send some other kids to university for free, but we are paying the taxes for them and we're paying extra for our own sprog. I mean, they're not really, because the kid themselves will do it via their pay. But things like that can actually be vote negative. So it may well be that politically, Starmer's current policy is the better one. But that's because I have got no polling evidence in favour of my concept, because, well, nobody's ever suggested it to the public. But I do think it shouldn't need to be a case of either universal tuition fees or universal free tuition. I do think there's the middle ground where you select means tested. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.